This is Marketing Uncomplicated. All right, everybody, welcome back to Uncomplicated. Today's guest is Vijay Rajendran, a Berkeley-trained executive coach, startup advisor, and former investor who spent the past 2 decades helping founders raise capital, grow with purpose, and step fully into their role as CEOs. From leading global startup support at 500 Global to the current work at GAI Ventures, Vijay has worked with founders across more than 80 countries. That's phenomenal. He's coached hundreds of entrepreneurs through pivotal leadership moments, from building teams to navigating through investor conversations. His new book, The Founding Framework, distills years of hard work, insights into a practical guide for founders trying to raise capital. I love guides. Make sense of term sheets and communicate their value clearly and powerfully, not just to investors, but to the market. Super important. We'll dig into that more. If you're an entrepreneur trying to fundraise, grow, or just get out of your own way, because they're all in their way, this episode is for you. Welcome to the show, Vijay. I'm really excited to have you.
Thank you, Sasha. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So let's just take a step back. Founder to CEO. I want to talk about that. You've coached hundreds of founders. What do you notice most often separates those who successfully transition into that CEO position, other than getting out of their own way?
Wow. Yeah, actually, that's very important. And much of what is involved is this new identity. It's not just a title. We can't just like print out a new business card or update the website and then suddenly, yes, you are a CEO. There's actually a number of things you have to do. There are different skills that you acquire in the way. So maybe the first one of those is you start to talk to customers, and maybe you've never done that before, and you start doing sales, right? Then you're scaling a team. Now you have to learn how to hire, and not just learn how to hire someone for your department or for your team back when you worked as a part of a company of any size, but how do you hire and set the culture and the expectation and the standard by which your company's going to grow. And then a third part of that is, how do you fundraise? In other words, if you are seeking external capital, can you tell a story? Can you have a plan? And can you manage a process that allows you to close that funding in a tight and finite way that doesn't seem to be never ending, and of course gives you the capital to focus on building the things that you care about with the team you want, and of course delighting your customers. So those are like some of the skills that are necessary to be acquired. And then what I think is key is, when you start a company and it's yours and you call yourself the CEO, you're not the chief executive anything. You're the chief everything officer. So how you get out of your own way is stop doing everything. And so with that team that joins you and can take on more and own more and have more responsibility, you go from chief everything officer to then chief enablement officer. Your role goes from like owning everything and carrying everything on your shoulders to setting other people up for success, so that later you can be chief executive officer, someone who thinks about orchestration of many things and the allocation of capital and the other responsibilities that come with like that role. So those are the three different CEO evolutions that take place.
I love that you say that you're not actually the CEO, because I mean, if we talk about all of the unicorn startups, Uber, let's say, being one of them, which was an interesting step down of the original founder, that is always going to happen. There's always going to get to a point where I believe that eventually, to your point, that they have to get out of their own way and realize, I've started this. I was the brains behind this, but now it's time for me to pull back and let the reins fly. And I think that you can even be thinking about this in the beginning, because you can't be doing everything on your own. And also, if you're thinking about hiring people, hire them, let them actually do the job, and don't micromanage, because then why have you hired them to begin with?
Yeah. The thing that everybody feels, but they don't talk about in moments like that, Sasha, is a feeling of distrust. Like you ultimately don't feel ready to let that person do their job. You're not sure if they have proven it to you yet. And there's a certain thing you have an expectation that maybe you haven't taken the time to communicate, or you're just expecting somebody to learn by inspiration or osmosis, like what it looks like to be successful. So that's where, in order to really enable people and let them do the job, you have to set very clearly, here's what I want done versus, okay, now you've done that thing, do it again, or this time you come up with a solution and we'll make a decision, or alternatively, you figure out what to do, you make a decision, keep me informed. That
Yeah.
is a spectrum of ways in which you can manage and lead others to do the work and allow for the right level of trust to be built and communication to be happening. Because
Yes.
usually what people do is they just say, well, we hired this person, and then wait and see what happens and hope that either the work is happening in a way that you're satisfied with, or alternatively, that the person is learning without any real framework or guide to just knowing what needs to be done and in a way that meets your standard.
Yeah. No, I really like that. What internal shifts does a founder have to make once they start building a team and raising capital? I mean, we've breached a little bit about this right now, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, give us like that guideline.
I feel in the early days, people are doing one of two things. They're either building the product or selling it. So people are either thinking in terms of engineering and product management or in terms of sales and marketing. And that is great. That's what you need to be doing. That's how you build momentum, win those first few customers that are just like manically focused on those two activities. Of course, a company is so many more things. And so you go from startup to company to a business that's scaling or scaled. You have the obvious things where there's a number of complementary areas and functions. There's also, of course, a lot of administrative responsibilities and reporting and things that have to be done. And the discipline you set about what those functions are, whether you set people up internally to do those roles, or you decide to have a fractional arrangement based on how sophisticated or complicated it is, matters a lot. But I think the number one thing that founders need to ask themselves is this person I'm bringing in to the organization going to consume my time or create time for me? And that is like really hard. Like they think, oh, we're supposed to have a controller, or we're supposed to, and I think we need to get someone in charge of HR, or maybe it's a social media person because I'm not good at that. Not maybe realizing they need to bring in first and foremost people who create leverage, operational leverage for them so that they can do more and so that they can, if not step away, but do much more than what is possible now. And if that person creates time for you, then that is very valuable. And those are the things that you want to prioritize and the roles you want to bring on as quickly as you can.
I love that. Some really good feedback and key takeaways for sure. Give us an example of a pivotal moment you've helped a founder navigate through that really has changed their leadership path. I'm sure you've done it for many, but what was one that was significant like that? Maybe they started and it was a little tough, right?
So frequently I'm working with a founder who has a co-founder and they don't see the world the same way, or the expectations that one person has for the other are not being fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, like, I like to impress upon people that all the problems in tech companies are not technical, or they're people related.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that one person.
Thank you for emphasizing that. It's really important. It really is.
Yeah.
Especially with tech getting a lot smarter.
Right? Yes, it's going to be even more about how we relate to each other as humans and what we communicate and how.
Yes.
So that doesn't mean that one person is bad and one person is good, one person's smart and the other person's lazy or anything like that, right?
It's just an ebb and flow.
Yeah. And the hard thing for us as human beings to frequently accept is that people value things differently or completely, dissimilarly from us. And what I mean by that is, the way in which people want to work and the hours they do it, the stuff they need to ship first, how they want to run a sprint and iterate the product. It has as much to do um, with craft and with building things that people love versus the pull of we need to start making money and we need this in customers' hands, or we want to impress upon our investors the milestones they're hitting. All of these things are good, and sometimes they're in tension with each other, and it's that tension that creates this conflict. And so an example I can think of is where both co-founders thought that they were doing the thing that was most important for the company, but one of them was externally facing, and the other one was more internally facing in their role. And so the one that was internally facing was like, we're doing all these things and you don't appreciate it. Like, of course, we've like built this thing and we've done this stuff. Whereas the one who's externally is like, the market expects us to have these features and that they can embed it in their system and that you can like have all this stuff and that we're ready and we've got this SOC 2 compliance, whatever it is, right? And in fact, like those two people feel the other person either doesn't appreciate them or the other person like doesn't recognize the scale of the issue. And so that's why I found that the quality of communication that two people in any kind of relationship, whether it's founding a startup or some kind of working in some other kind of business, or even a domestic relationship, you find that the quality of communication you have is a very big predictor of the longevity of that relationship. So if people can have healthy conflict, if they can talk about like, hey, when we didn't have this and you said and you pushed it back another week, like here's how I felt, and here's something I'm worried about, and let's like talk about how to address that without fear and blame. It takes a lot of work. Like this stuff takes work. If it were easy, everyone would be able to do it. But that's a big part of taking ownership, is that you also take ownership for making sure you have a high trust and high performing type of team dynamic, and that often rests on your relationship with your co-founder.
Yeah. Wow. That is really important, and thank you for that, because of the essence of it's work, and it doesn't just come overnight. It really doesn't. So I want to dive into your funding framework, because I want to dig into like how you set up the framework, and I think frameworks are so great for those that don't necessarily work, like in the field that you work in and similar to me. And it really helps uncover and support things from a much more simplistic manner, hence the fact that you built it. But what are the biggest myths about fundraising that you wish founders would drop?
Yeah. Too often people assume that fundraising is about just knowing the right people, or the serendipity
Like
of
networking connections, you mean?
Yeah, like if you were an alumni of a certain school or company or accelerator program, then the connections exist and they're magically going to open for you. And so a lot of people, when they need help with fundraising, or I just meet them there, they ask, who can you introduce me to? Right? Which is the wrong question, right? Instead, the question is, who is a great fit for the business and the vision we have? And that would be an answerable question, except people haven't really defined authentically and strongly enough their story. They haven't prepared for going to market, because it's not just the performance of like, hey, I can show up and I'm really charismatic and I can pitch or something like that. It is actually the preparation that goes into that moment that matters a great deal. And so the funding framework says, okay, it is about a process and it's about preparation, not just serendipity or luck. And it's also not about how I have to use like large numbers in order to talk to 100 people and then one will write me a check, right? Instead, it is much more about how I a target and outreach to people. So the four parts of the funding framework are, first of all, storytelling, as I mentioned, then organization, then outreach, and then closing with confidence. And so I have the framework on the book, and as you can see, it's a iceberg, because what
Yes.
people see is the top of the iceberg. They see that company X had raised $10 million, and there's an article about it in TechCrunch or something like that.
They see
And
the like glorification and
yeah,
the all the not fun stuff, but all the amazing things that have come out.
mm-hmm. And you just see that real tip, when the body of work and the things that are often invisible to people is everything that went into making that possible. And that's
Mhm.
where the storytelling, organization, outreach, and closing matters so much, is that you've done all this work and you've prepared and you've got these great tools at your disposal to be able to run a tight and efficient process, or as opposed to a never-ending fundraising process.
Yeah. So walk us through a little bit about, without giving away the entire, your secret sauce, but
Mm-hmm.
walk us through your high level strategies of your framework
Yeah.
below the iceberg.
So too often people find, or maybe they've been trained to craft their story around, this is this is a problem. Here's our solution. Here's how the market is. Let me tell you something about our team and our experience, and then here's how much we're asking for, and a little bit about how we expect to spend it. But that how we expect to spend it is generally the same. It's like 2/3
Yep.
engineering,
Yep.
1/3 marketing, or something like that. Instead of just being able to check the box on that, you covered problem, solution, market, team, and the ask, and some other things. You need to tell a really different type of story, and because your goal for your story is not that you have checked all the boxes, it's that you are memorable. It's that at the end of the week, when someone thinks back of the meetings they had, they say, I need to bring Sasha in to talk to our partners next Monday. Or even during the thing, they say, like, great, can you send me some more information? When can we schedule the next meeting? Because your goal is to be memorable, and so that you get the next call, the next meeting, the next opportunity to get to know this investor closely. So to be memorable, you have to tell a good story. And it's not a secret what a good story looks like. We know it consists of a situation, some sort of conflict or tension, some resolution there, and then like how that story ends with. But when we go a level deeper and we understand the hero's journey, it's really great to tell that story through the eyes of your customer. So a lot of founders will start by telling their story. So it's like, I spent 4 years at Caltech, and then I discovered this thing, and then we realized it was going to cure, some disease, and then I've been working with a grant from here, and then now we've launched it, and now this is going to go, before we go to clinical trials, we're looking to raise money for something, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that is your story, but it's not your patient story. Right? It is not your customer story, and is not the global user story. If you instead
Mm-hmm.
tell a story which is about an individual and their experience and the thing they're struggling with, and how they can't connect to loved ones, or they're struggling to close the books in their firm, and they're there on New Year's Eve, and they're while
Yeah.
their friends and their family are doing other things, right? Somehow there's an emotional response to that, and you tell stories like that in order for people to relate, and then for you to talk about how your um, your app, or your AI chatbot, or maybe the therapeutic that you've developed, can actually change the course of this person's life, when they were struggling, where they used to be fine, now they're struggling. This like brought them back to what they were doing before, or a world that was much better than it ever was. And I think that is a really important way, because those stories become memorable. And so you do
Mm-hmm.
that The other thing is to really focus on your team. A lot of people bury the team in the back. I actually suggest talking about you and your team up front. So because if I don't know you, I'm looking for you to establish your authority and why I should listen to you up front. If everybody else is, telling their team slide or their team part of their pitch later on, then it's a missed opportunity. Like people are still wondering, like, and why do you feel you're the right person to do this, right? So establishing the team up front, using the hero's journey, and then building a credible story about why this business and why now is the time is really important.
Yeah. I love that you bring up the hero's journey because it's exactly what we do within the marketing sphere as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the concept of, as you're saying, your story from a sales pitch standpoint is not your journey in terms of how you got to where you got to and the backstory. I think that story is nice maybe to be present on your website and like to really show people how maybe you've developed something and it allows people to get to know you and so on and so forth. But it's similar in the sense of you aren't your ideal customer profile. And a lot of founders are, going out there saying, well, I developed this because either somebody, like if it's a disease, somebody in my family had it, or if it's a product or service because there was a gap in the market and I'm just trying to make my life, that much simpler and easier and really, get to do what I want to do through this service or this app. You have to remove yourself from that and go into the hero's journey, which I think if you haven't read Donald Miller, where he talks about this, and it's called Brand Story, and he leads you through those 7 points. And some of the highlights are, your client or your customer is the hero. And he wasn't the first person that came up with that, because it was, I think, in the 70s where they were developing the storyline to get to, that your ICP was your hero, but then it's drawing them through a guide, which is your product and service, that then leads them into that call to action, that then leads them into purchasing something where thereby it becomes their transformation because they're doing business with you. So then it's showcasing in some certain aspects of, well, if they didn't do business with you, this is where they would still be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's so underrated that, a business decision or an investing decision is emotional, and people want to see some future version of themselves that's good. And so if you can bring that into the story where they're succeeding as an investor or they're succeeding as a customer, and they can imagine a world that's one they want to see, now you have them emotionally connected to you and your product. And that's so important. We think that only applies in the consumer landscape. And of course, that's not really true. And to your point about like some of the research that was done around this, and I'm thinking of Campbell's book, The Founder of the Thousand Faces. Like this is part of like myth and legend. Right, like the way in which we have told myths and legends and great stories, and box office hits of this century. Like all these stories have this in common about this transformation and the role of the guide and the hero. So you are not the hero; you are the guide. You are Obi-Wan Kenobi, Gandalf, Dumbledore, whatever. Like that and that is the thing to remember.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. So thank you for bringing that up. So much connection between sales and marketing, and it's detrimental if you separate the two of them.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other conversation. How should founders approach investor psychology, especially if they're not from a traditional VC background?
I think the best way to look at investor psychology is that most investors are inclined to bet, make bets, right? They want to invest in the right companies, but many of them don't want to pull the trigger too early, right? And so the ideal investment is where you've had ample time to look at it and you can make the right decision at the last possible moment. It's very different from when you are a small business owner or a founder and you're trying to be decisive and move quickly, right? You just want to make a decision and not be like stuck in analysis paralysis. And so what changes investor psychology is often described as, FOMO, or fear of missing out. And that's because people see that others are moving on something that investors they know or trust or who have good taste and judgment, have approved of a thing. And that is like a very key marketing principle, right? We know from Cialdini's book on influence of social proof. Like it's very, very important to investors and their psychology. And so who's investing? Is there a warm introduction? Is this a deal moving forward? And is there momentum? Those are the things that I think activate investors to take action. And from a marketing standpoint, like create like these ideas of, hey, there's scarcity. This deal might not be around forever, or there's social proof.
Yeah.
I see others taking action whom I look up to or even respect. And then, investors are often really smart, but they're not experts in everything. And that means rather than deferring to them, you should, establish your authority and the reason to explain and have them understand that not just what you're talking about, but that you have a point of view that is going to make this business successful and seize these opportunities. Because the best investors out there love to learn.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like in marketing for social media content, we say there are three hooks. There's storytelling, there's education, and there's authority. And that's almost quite true in terms of what you develop in your pitch. There's a little bit of storytelling. There's a lot of education, because to your point, when you say like VCs don't know everything, I think if you educate them and you turn on that light bulb and they get what you're doing, and then you insert that authority, you have a winning pitch. Or what is really your formula for truly making a compelling pitch in today's market? Because it's a sea of noise today, and it's going to get louder.
I'd say there are a couple key things here. The first is to explain things like you're talking to a smart 9th or 10th grader.
Yeah.
Not because investors are stupid. It's that the
simplicity.
The things you're going to explain in like technical language, or assuming somebody has worked in the field for a long time, like don't need to be at first kind of broken down with that level of either jargon or sophistication. Like keep it painfully simple. It will probably be more sophisticated than that, but I kind of give people the idea of like, imagine you're talking to a teenager, right? Like they're smart, they know a couple things in the world, but you don't need to go much beyond that in terms of complexity. The second thing I would emphasize is actually when you stop pitching and start listening, you get to learn a lot about the investor. And when you create a back and forth and a dialogue that involves a lot of you asking questions of them, you establish a lot of authority and also respect in terms of what you're doing. So this can be very simple questions like, what's your average ticket size? Where are you in the life of this fund? Do you, when you work with a company in this space, what are the ways you like to be involved? Tell me, like, do you follow on? Like these questions that seem like they're diligence and asking about them are actually really important for them to understand that also how this works, but moreover that you're building a sense of like, hey, I'm talking to lots of companies, lots of investors, lots of pitching a lot of them, and I want to be able to evaluate you, and so you're asking questions and you're listening to them as much as they're learning about you and your company, and they're asking you those questions. So don't be just in the hot seat all the time. Make sure that it is a conversation and not just a one-way pitch.
I like that you say, to create a dialogue and a conversation when you stop pitching, but you really educate them on things. I think that you really grasp somebody's thoughts and evoke that interest, which I think is super important. I mean, and it really is in the tactic of like winning in sales, right? I mean, if you really are selling somebody, I mean, cold calling has to be like the worst kind of sales, right? But if you really then hit them on the standpoint of a story, or you really begin to understand their pain point, then you're winning. You're no longer selling, you're making a connection. So, I appreciate you saying that, because I think a lot of people go into it and thinking, I need to have the best pitch, or how do I, put this together? And I think sometimes if you relax and you just come down, and these guys are people too, and you just approach it in that manner, it can be better received.
Exactly. That way, people are more inclined to hear you because they feel like you have taken interest in them and how their firm works and what they care about, and the things they want to do as investors. Because you're not just taking their money and you're never going to like hear from them again. You're going to have them on your cap table and be a part of your lives, and hopefully be a partner in some way in pushing the business forward for many years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you explain term sheets and cap tables in a way that makes them feel less intimidating for
Yeah.
first timers? Speaking of making things very simple.
Yeah, of course. So term sheets and cap tables are these words that get thrown around. A term sheet is basically a non-binding offer from an investor, or it could possibly be something that you create under certain circumstances. But generally, it comes from the investor, and it says, we'll invest $2 million in your company, and it says what the nature of the security is. So it could be for stock, right, or it could be for some form of note or an agreement for future stock, or as also known as a safe, simple agreement for future equity is what it stands for. And then it will also say in the term sheet what are it's a big word, liquidation preferences, right? So ways in which the investor gets paid first before perhaps the founder and the team and other people, if in the case there is an exit or a liquidation of the business, right? So there are many other aspects. So that's generally what it is. It's like a very simple, usually like just a few pages outline of what's there. And there are free resources. Like if you go to NVCA, which is the National Venture Capital Association, and their website, they have a sample term sheet that's been created by a law firm. There are also accelerators like Y Combinator. They have term sheets of things you can read, and so you know what that looks like and what to expect. And so things like look weird and outside the norm, you can push back on them. And so when I say it's non-binding, it's because I'm making an offer to you to invest in the company, and it's this much money for this much ownership, right, in such a time frame, and you sign it. And then that means while it's non-binding, I may say you can't shop this around, so you can't take it to another investor and say, hey, can you give me more money, or a better valuation, or for less ownership stake. So once that happens, it is non-binding, because now I, as an investor, have to do due diligence. I have to look a bit closer, and I may want to really get to know the business inside and out before we sign a binding agreement for the investment. So that's basically it. What's the cap table? Once I've made this investment, there is a capitalization table, which basically says who owns what in the company. So it lists, all the different shareholders and how many shares they have, and then of course how many shares that might have been issued but are not outstanding by your entity, your board, by you, right? So that's that. Some people keep this in Excel. Today, there are so many cap table tools that are available online and that companies can use that help you manage this in a very accurate way, and then tie into how investors are able to track their ownership in different companies. So that in a nutshell is what is a term sheet, and what is it for, and what is a cap table, and how you would use it.
So you said that leadership and messaging are equally critical in both marketing and fundraising. How do those two worlds intersect?
How does leadership intersect with marketing and fundraising?
No, so it's leadership and messaging
Leadership
are
and messaging.
are equally critical in both marketing and fundraising.
Yeah.
How do those two worlds intersect?
Marketing and fundraising intersect because you have a positioning, right? And you have brand, you have a way you're talking about the your product and how it's experienced by a customer, the price of it, and so forth. And some of these things require you to, of course, be really clear in that you know it reflects our strategy and our values and the culture of the business, and you're communicating in a way that everybody internally understands it and everybody
Mm-hmm.
externally understands it. And the same is true for fundraising. Like, we're raising this capital because we're going to do this. We're going to like spend it on certain priorities. And everyone inside needs to understand that, and everybody outside needs to understand it. Why? Because people will get resentful if they see, oh, you've raised $50 million. Like, why don't we have like a really like sick office yet? Right? Like, oh, you've raised this money. How come, we don't have better, coffee or whatever it is, right? Like what is this capital for? What are we raising it? What do we expect to do in terms of expansion, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
making the experience of our customers better? Or maybe it is making this an awesome place to work, or maybe it is like paying people like at the top of the industry, or maybe it is like we're raising capital, and by the way, we created um, this employee option pool to make sure that you as employees are going to own a meaningful part of the business and create that opportunity for people into the future at the risk of dilution to of course the founding team, and those are decisions and things that have to be communicated very clearly. Here's how we did it. This is why, and what it means for you internally and externally.
Mm. Thank you. That was a really good explanation. What communication traps do you see founders fall into when talking to either investor or their teams? And I'm sure you've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, I think the pitch only, and not to like talk and listen at the same time. Stop pitching, start listening, as I say, is really important
Yeah.
up front in the book. The other thing is, the last part of the funding framework I mentioned is closing, right? A lot
Mm-hmm.
of people anticipate that they don't need to manage the closing of the fundraise. So they're like, you're a professional investor. My lawyer will do this other thing. Like, I just get to sit back and then wait for the money to land in the bank account, as opposed to chasing people down and stressing and communicating and re-emphasizing and reminding them, oh, we're doing this and this has to close on this day, and you need to like send the wire here, and who do I need to follow up with to make sure this happens? And the day of, like getting all the money to come in the bank, or getting signatures from existing investors to approve the next deal, and that sort of thing. So really, really important that you manage that, and that you have the help of your team internally if necessary in order to manage that closing.
Hmm. Yep, I couldn't agree more. In the sense of what we talked about, how things are changing so rapidly, the ocean is getting louder and noisier, and with the intersection now of it's not that AI is new, but the sense of more faster to market, AI has really today you don't need a lot of money to start a business, right? And so that's really growing. What advice do you have for founders that are looking to start startups and build them from AI related platforms, and what advice do you have for them staying grounded while innovating so fast, because nobody knows how AI is going to change things in a month from now?
Yeah, no one really knows how things are going to change a month from now. I think one of the things that really matters is understanding what are the key activities we need to do, and then how do we use AI to keep people in the loop to make sure it's being done right, and then what are the things that we don't automate for automation's sake, but we do because it gives us time back.
Mhm.
So that is kind of thinking of AI from the assistant and from the co-pilot type of standpoint in terms of how we use it. In the future, we will use agents to do a lot of things, but right now those agents are not necessarily there. I think if you're starting a business or in business right now, you need to understand like what are the types of agents that could help me scale my business and do more with what I've got right now. Then in the future, yes, things will continue to change and shift. One of the beliefs I have is that we won't ever get to this like magical stage of product market fit, because too often entrepreneurs tell themselves a story of, if I just had this money, like then everything's going to be fine. Or if we just launch the product, then this is going to go smoothly. Or if we just open the new branch here, or if I just like hired like a director of this, then my problems will go away. Your problems don't go away. Like we realize you just like get new ones. And that's why I think what AI does is, because of the rapidity of this change, is move us from product market fit towards some kind of product market evolution. And that product market evolution is basically, one where we are constantly, launching the better products and features and iterating for our customers, and figuring out new go to motion go to market sales motions and things like that. So yeah, that is, I think, the mindset that people need. It's not that some people aren't doing that right now, but certainly what AI does is just like increase that rate of change for everybody.
Yeah. Vijay, this has been super informative. I'm definitely personally going to have to get a copy of your book ASAP. I think there's a lot of interesting and great nuggets across the board that really overlap and translate back into marketing, and honestly getting people set up foundationally to get to the point of investments and funding. So thank you for that. To everyone listening, we'll list all of the details to get in touch with Vijay and his company website, as well as the ability to be able to purchase his book. But before we let you go, there's a few questions just we're going to throw at you and answer them, and just let me know what's coming to mind.
Sure.
What's one piece of advice you'd give your younger self just starting out as a founder?
Don't give up.
Always the perseverance to keep moving forward. What's a book, habit, or mindset that's had the biggest impact on your growth as a coach and advisor?
I recommend to people the book by Clayton Christensen, How Will You Measure Your Life?
Okay. Fill in the blank. Entrepreneurs who learn to will always have a competitive edge.
Move quickly.
Thank you so much, Vijay. This has been wonderful. We really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast with us today.
Thank you, Sasha. This was super fun.